Hi, I'm Shane.
And I'm Alex.
And this is the RPM podcast.
And for one final time this year, it's our post-race podcast, this time for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. I must apologise in advance because I'm full of cold at the moment, but the only thing more congested than my sinuses right now are the Twitter feeds of Formula One fans around the world as they gnash teeth about what happened in the Grand Prix that we just witnessed over the weekend. It was quite the spectacle. It does nothing to really summarise what we witnessed, but Shane and I are going to do our best to try and piece together what happened and talk about it. And I hope maybe I can't guarantee closure, but what I can guarantee is that we'll try and put it behind us. Shane, is that what we can we agree to put it behind us and try and move on?
So I've been quite vocal on my Twitter feed for the last 24 hours.
Quite is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, isn't it?
On my Twitter feed in the last 24 hours. And I have to admit, I've tried to stay a little bit impartial. We'll get onto that later on the podcast. But yes, after this podcast has been recorded, edited and uploaded, I'm putting this season behind us. And we shall continue with multiple other podcasts later on in the year about, season reviews and driver reviews. But this race especially, I will put behind me and I will not talk about it on Twitter again.
We get it in writing. We need one of those default white text on black background Instagram stories. It's the only way. That's the now agreed way to go forward in any.
It's a formal contract.
Sense. Exactly. Yeah. Nothing's more formal than Instagram. Okay, so Shane, let's get started with the details.
So I thought I'd start off our talking point segment with relatively low drama and not much interesting stuff. Of course, I'm going to talk about practice and qualifying, kind of summarize that whole day or two up in like one little talking point. But first things first, we've come to Abu Dhabi for the 10th time or the 11th time, but we've got a newly configured circuit. And it was quite the talking point actually going into the weekend. Red Bull definitely thought that the circuit had been configured in a way where Mercedes would gain an advantage. And undoubtedly, that kind of was the case. But these changes were signed off like over a year ago before we knew how, the Mercedes car would be going into the 2021 season. So we saw a couple of chicanes disappear, which I thought was great. So we've got a chicane in Sector 1 gone. A chicane in Sector 3, where you usually have that double left-hander, was now a nice banked left-hander. And then the final part of Sector 3, which is kind of Monaco-esque, has been opened up ever so slightly to increase the average speed going through that sector. So I thought some nice changes going into the weekend. Alex, what's your thoughts on the updated Abu Dhabi layout?
It's pretty hard to say if it made things better or not after just one outing. But yeah, it did seem to be a good idea to remove some of these slower parts. They almost felt like roadblocks, didn't they? Here's a chicane here, it's a chicane there. Kimi Raikkonen thought that the change in the new Turn 9, previously Turn 11, making it the fast left-hander instead of the chicane, he thought that removed a potential overtaking spot. Because whereas before you could sort of dive up and then go into the chicane, now it's sort of fast left-hander and it's at the end of a DRS zone, but you've either made it before the corner or you haven't really. Which I can see the logic behind. It did make the lap shorter, and I think that overall it's best not to have too many tracks on the calendar that are Spa or Singapore-esque in lap time. It's good to have those tracks, but Abu Dhabi kind of felt unnecessarily long. I think it was about sort of late 130s.
Yes,
it was nearly 140 in length.
Yeah.
So it's a fair bit shorter now, and I think that helps. But yeah, I'm not quite sure what to make of it, but my initial impressions is that it just made for a slightly more immediate circuit. I don't think it's put it above the sort of slightly below average tier of track that it is. It is still an incredibly underwhelming track for the finale of the World Championship, but yeah, at least they're trying something different. I can give them credit for that.
Absolutely. And you have to assume that when they were taking into consideration the design changes for this track, that they weren't actually thinking for the 2021 regulation car. They might have been thinking, or hopefully thinking, for the 22 regulation car and beyond, where overtaking and following is a lot easier. So actually that turn 9 now, like you spoke about, and how Kimi mentioned it was not really an overtaking opportunity now, which I completely agree with, because it was a hard braking zone, which now isn't a hard braking zone. But actually, maybe going forward into next year, there might be some overtaking going into there. They might see some cars go side by side through turn 9, which would be great to see. But like you said, no real impact on the race itself or overtaking. It's just one of those circuits, and I agree with you. For the final of an F1 season, I think Abu Dhabi holds that. Well, I think we go to Abu Dhabi because we start off in the sun, we end in the night. We've got that fascinating hotel which goes over the track with the lights. It's a spectacle. The venue is superb, as in like the facilities I heard from the media to the pit lane to the hotels. Everything is, so good. So much above, the majority of where these race cars go throughout the year, that they kind of want to end where the money is, unfortunately. But it's just a shame that actually it doesn't really do racing any favors, does it? It's not really a racetrack. It's more of a follow and let's see what we can do, a do track. It's not a Brazil, which we've come to love over the last couple of years.
I guess its relative youth as a circuit means that it lacks a certain heart that a lot of tracks seem to do. But then I would compare that to something like Bahrain, which I think is an excellent track and is relatively new and feels like it has a sort of growing... Yeah, it has a growing passion, and like you say, it starts to have a certain character once you've seen a few races on it. But Abu Dhabi still comes across as a bit. It still comes across as a bit of a show, doesn't it? It comes across as a bit of a spectacle, and it's not an awful track, but it's not a very good track either. So it's very, like I said, underwhelming for the end. And
like you said,
and it is a show, and a show is what we got.
A show is what we got. But anyway, let's diverse from the track and talk about practice and qualifying. And there's not really much to talk about in practice because the only interesting thing was for me, and that's why I tuned in, was that we had this new track layout and I wanted to see how the cars took these corners and, if it caused any problems and whether the new tarmac or the road surface would cause any problems. And nothing really happened. Kimi had that strange old spin, which looked worse when the camera panned onto his car because the back of the car was wrecked and the front of the car was wrecked. And I thought Kimi Raikkonen has well and truly stacked it and has had a huge off. But actually watching the replay, he just bounced off the Armco barrier and then into a traditional barrier. And unfortunately, it just wrecked both ends of his car, which was a terrible way to start his last Grand Prix. And unfortunately for Kimi, it didn't get much better. He might disagree with that because, he was quite happy to leave the car and jump out and call it a day. But practice was pretty standard with your top 10 looking like the top 10. And obviously, going into qualifying, everyone was healthy. And we'll talk about how we got the message from Nikita later on. But what did you make of qualifying? Who was your standout driver in qualifying?
Well, first and foremost, we got a bit of a surprise pole from Max Verstappen because it looked like it was going to be Hamilton's pretty fair and square.
Yep.
Perez obviously gave him a tow, but I don't think that made a massive difference, really. It might have gave him a tenth or so, but I think that most of what he gained was just in the lap itself. It was an absolutely blistering lap from Verstappen. He did very, very well to put it on pole. But I don't quite understand why Mercedes weren't playing the slipstream game as well. Seeing as Bottas eventually qualified P6 and didn't really look much in with a shout of braking any higher, it just seemed easy to make use of him in that way, for lack of a better phrase. Like Red Bull did with Perez, and Mercedes kind of missed a trick there. I felt they just didn't even explore it. It appeared, so that was a bit of a surprise. Don't understand why they did that, but standout performance, it's got to be Lando Norris. P3. We've been talking about how that car has been struggling a bit more near the end of the series, the end of the season, and it's an absolutely brilliant lap for him to put it there. I was thinking, Max and Lewis take each other out right at the beginning, and
Lando for the win.
P1. Redemption for Russia. Maybe,
I knew you were going to say that.
It wasn't to be, sadly.
No, like you said, Max was on one of his laps, very similar to Saudi Arabia, where he just hooked up every single corner. But unlike Saudi Arabia, he got the last corner correct and managed to cross that line 4 or 3 tenths, well, almost 4 tenths actually ahead of Lewis Hamilton. And I was watching the Sky commentary afterwards, and they did like their Sky pad, and they were trying to calculate how much of a tow Perez or how much of a gain Perez gave Verstappen, and they said no more than 2.5 tenths. So actually, pole was on for Max Verstappen, and then Perez, they worked together so beautifully, and that was to be carried out for the whole weekend. as for Hamilton and Bottas, I don't know, because Max and Perez pulled that card, showed that card pretty early on in Q3. So Mercedes had time to react, but they chose not to. Whether they were confident enough that the car had the pace or the car had that one lap speed, it just didn't happen. And also, just to finalize on qualifying, Yuki Tsunoda was the only car outside of the Mercedes and Red Bull drivers to qualify on the medium tyre in Q2. Every other car was on the softs. And I thought, hold on a second. This has gone pretty unrecognised throughout this weekend. Actually, Yuki Tsunoda has done a fantastic job and put it in Q3 on a medium tyre. And that played dividends like throughout the race. And I'm sure we'll talk about him later on as well, because he pulled a blinder. So fair play to Yuki. He's had a very up and down roller coaster kind of season. I'm sure it's been emotional. At one point, he wasn't sure whether he deserved to be signed for next year, but he certainly ended the season off on a high. And fair play to him. One of the highlights of qualifying for me.
Yeah, it was the start of an uncharacteristically competent weekend for Yuki Tsunoda, wasn't it? Like, this guy does know. He can do it. There we go. That's how you do it. He's bookended the season, hasn't he? He started off well, and then was then crap for 20 races, and then decided to do something at the end as well. Brilliant. Nice one.
Yeah, hopefully that's the only bits people remember. Ricciardo slightly disappointed me as well. He was half a second off Lando's pace. I really don't know where that McLaren's at the moment. You see Lando put it into P3, and admittedly, it was only by a couple of thousandths of a second or a couple of hundredths of a second, because P3, 4, and 5 all finished on a 1:22.9. So it was very close. But equally, Ricciardo was on a 1:23.4, so half a second off. Really not sure what happened there. Just couldn't put it together, unfortunately.
Not quite sure what to make of the McLaren near the end of the season here, because in combining the potential falling behind of performance compared to the other teams around them with the end of the year, everyone's components start to get a little bit wobbly. Maybe Daniel Ricciardo, because he's been struggling and maybe been overdriving in places, maybe that's affected his components and he has more wear near the end of the season. I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses for the guy, but I'm not quite sure what to make of that whole thing. In some ways, he's found more pace at times in the second half of the season, but has also been less consistent.
Yeah.
So, but we'll talk about more about that sort of thing perhaps when we do our reviews of the teams for the whole season. But Ricciardo was disappointing, but honestly, I was kind of satisfied with him getting into Q3. Right, shall we move on from qualifying?
Go on, entertain us.
Yeah, there's obviously some dramatic stuff. I think let's keep going with let's keep the heart rate low for now. We'll contain the froth for a little bit longer. Let's talk about Kimi Raikkonen, who for the last time, the Iceman. He's finally actually going this time. Not like last time where he went off to do some rallying and came back again. He's actually going to leave this time, and it is quite sad. He is a legend. He is the legend in many ways, because he is F1's most experienced driver ever. 349 races after he burst onto the scene at Sauber in 2001. I remember he was an absolute beast at McLaren, even if the car itself kept failing to deliver on its promises. Kimi himself didn't. And I remember there was a lot of speculation that he was too young, he was too inexperienced, and then he came in and was incredible. So it was they backed the right man. I think he personally had what it took to win the championship in 2003 and 2005, but ended up losing out to various reliability issues. But also in more recent times, a lot of the attention on Raikkonen has been on his anti-PR attitude and his non-conformity for which a long time was pretty funny and endearing when he backed it up with strong results. But I must admit, I found it a bit less amusing when he was left wanting for performances. Like when he went back to Ferrari after Lotus, he just never really, he was so thoroughly beaten by Sebastian Vettel and just seemed like less than even a wingman. He really was left wanting for performances a lot of the time. But I can appreciate his earnestness and not wanting to toe the usual line of F1 drivers amongst the press, and that there's something to be said for that, I think. Now, just as a little sort of memorandum of the man as he leaves, I always remember his skill at McLaren. He was just as regarded as Schumacher at the time for his skill and with good reason. I think his best victory is probably Japan 2005, where he won from 17th on the grid. He overtook Fisichella on the penultimate lap, I believe. It's pretty iconic moment. Just one of those things that's burned into your memory. You can remember all of the commentary and the image of Ron Dennis celebrating, which you didn't see very often. You didn't see Ron Dennis emote very often, but he was actually like, yeah! And even, that alone makes it pretty memorable. I always think of his overtake on Schumacher Eau Rouge in Belgium in 2012 as well. That was when he was with Lotus. Just because it's an overtake at Eau Rouge on Michael Schumacher, so it's just pretty incredible. Apparently, he made a deal as well. Funny story. He made a deal when he was at Lotus that he'd get paid for every point he scored, and the team, not being particularly moneyed at the time, couldn't afford to pay him because he was scoring so many points. Nice. Shane, what are your favourite memories of the Iceman?
It's a hard one for me, actually, because I'm quite recent to the sport. Well, you've been watching the sport a lot longer than I have. I've been watching it probably since on and off since 2008. The first year I watched was when Lewis won the championship, and on that penultimate corner, and then we moved forward, and I probably didn't get back into it until 2012 or 13. I think there was some issues with it being in the UK, or whether I just lost interest or moved out of my family home, so I didn't watch it with my dad. And then all of a sudden I got back into it. So that golden era for Kimi was way before I started watching Formula One, and when he was still entertaining and doing quite well between 2008 and 2012, 13, I was on and off with Formula One. But I just love the guy's. He's clearly passionate about the sport. He loves driving fast cars, but he hates everything else to do with Formula One. He hates the PR. He hates the management. He hates social media. He just doesn't want to talk to anyone. And actually, like you said, I think there's something to be said about someone who just wants to turn up and race cars and get on with his life. And I think I've grown to like him. Kimi's always been there in the sport. He's always been there since I've been watching Formula One, whether he's been with Ferrari or now Alfa Romeo. But the last couple of days where I've been seeing numerous interviews on Sky Sports with him, and how he talks about him leaving the sport, not because he's falling out of love with it, but because he wants to spend more time with his family. He wants to do the things he loves, and how difficult it's been on his wife and children, that he's a 23 race calendar. That's so long. And you think these drivers have had to deal with quarantine issues and COVID, so they've barely seen their families this year. And actually, I thought, you know what? This guy's a legend in his own right. He deserves to take the time. He deserves now to leave Formula One. He hasn't left on a high like some drivers do. He's left because it's his time, and actually he wants to spend time with his family. And it was quite nice to see that slightly emotional, loving side of Kimi Raikkonen just before he bowed out of the sport. And so I'm glad we got that glimpse of it, because it'll be, Kimi left, but he's having fun now. He's doing whatever he wants because he's not worried about racing the next week or flying to a different country. He's just going to be chilling with his wife and kids.
Yeah, and good luck to the man and to his family. And he's had an indelible impact on the sport. And like I say, he is the most experienced driver in its history.
It's crazy.
I don't know if anyone will ever outdo that. I'm sure some people might be getting close in time, but just wanted to give a little farewell to Kimi Raikkonen. All right, what do you want to go on to next?
Well, we're still going to keep the heart rates relatively calm, cool, low, collective. And we're going to talk about Sebastian Vettel. And not the abysmal year he's had, but the fact that he's actually won something. And that is Overtake of the Year award by Crypto.com, out of all sponsors. But Sebastian Vettel finally won it with 132 overtakes this year. More than anyone else. He beat Alonso by 6 overtakes, I believe. I'm not sure what the award was. I should imagine it's a trophy of some kind. I think I saw a trophy. He parked up in Parc Fermé after the race and asked if he had won 1 million jelly beans. And I kind of want to see someone give Sebastian Vettel 1 million jelly beans. A nice guy. You know, he's just a nice guy. And I'm glad that he's won something this year, given that he struggled in that Aston Martin. The Aston Martin has struggled altogether. But is winning Overtakes of the Year a good thing? Because actually, you've overtaken a lot of cars, which usually suggests that your car's faster than where you've qualified. So have they not been qualifying in the position they need to? Have they not been putting that car anywhere where it needs to? And clearly their race pace is stronger than their qualifying pace or their one lap pace. It's an interesting one. Sebastian said himself he wasn't too sure how he felt about the award because maybe it means that he should have done better this year because there are a lot of drivers who haven't made as many overtakes because they started further up the field. What's your thoughts on that?
It's certainly a sign of an entertaining season for him and the others around him because they've overtaking has got to be the most exciting part of racing and actually battling people and getting the move done. So I guess at least he's been able to do that in that car. It shows that the car at least is capable of overtaking. But like you say, it suggests that there's an underperforming element going into the race. I think it's true to say that Aston Martin have been particularly underwhelming in qualifying, and but it also shows his experience as a driver. That's true of Alonso as well, who was vying with. It's an interesting award. I quite like that it's a statistic that's maintained and that it's an award that goes out because it's kind of harmless, really, and it's a nice award to give out. I don't know if it's something that they'll do more of, but also it helps because it's not just any old overtake award, isn't it? It's like the crypto.
The Crypto.com overtake of the most overtakes of the year award.com. I don't know.
All right. Yeah, I mean, not going to make too much of it to shill some company. But it's obviously a sponsoring opportunity for some company as well. But it's an interesting idea, and I think that good for Vettel for actually being able to overtake people, but also a sign of the struggle that Aston Martin have had. At least they've come out of the season having won something.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a sign that they've struggled, but it's also good to see that Seb still has it in him to go race wheel to wheel, throw that car around and get those positions.
Well, if he doesn't, he shouldn't be in the sport.
Exactly. I kind of just contradicted myself. But I guess this overtakes of the year award sponsored by Crypto.com is very similar to the DHL fastest pit stop and the fastest
You're getting
lap
a backhander somewhere, Shane. Is someone like pressing money into your hand under the table? Like
DHL and Crypto.com are paying for the podcast now. But yeah, it's just an opportunity. But I quite like those awards. It's interesting to see those statistics and who got the fastest pit stops and who got the fastest lap. Interestingly, Red Bull have 10 faster pit stops than Mercedes' fastest pit stop of this year, which goes to show that they've been working hard and that they won.
Yeah, their pit crew is incredible.
They are so good. I remember when they changed the pit confirm strategy, didn't they? And everyone thought we're going to see 2.5, 2.6 second pit stops. And yeah, it took a couple of weeks for Red Bull to get their heads around it, like it did every team, because we saw some really bad pit stops for a while. And then Red Bull 2.1 seconds. Hold on a second. That was fast before. Before they changed the regulations to slow pit stops down. And they've absolutely blitzed it. So, yeah, fair play.
They are an energy drinks company, so I guess it's
do you reckon they all drink Red Bull beforehand?
Yeah, they probably get all sugared up, all taurine or whatever it is that goes into energy drinks. They get plenty of that in their system, and then they're fighting for it. It's a good advert for their energy drink, I suppose.
It is, I suppose. Fair enough.
Right, should we let's get a bit more serious.
Okay, how serious are we going to get there? Are we going properly serious or are we going lap 1, turn kind of 6 serious?
Yeah, the latter.
Okay.
I think we're going to talk about Max's dive into turn. Is it turn 6?
Yeah. Yes, turn 6. Yeah, got it in bold right.
Yeah.
Here.
So the end of the first DRS zone.
Yeah.
Max makes a pretty bold move to try and take the position here, but I think that Red Bull had a reasonable grievance for this bit. Max made the corner, and there was a definite move on until Hamilton backed out and went across the runoff. Apparently, he slowed to remove the advantage that he'd gained going off the track, but Max made it alongside him before the apex. And it seemed a bold but fair move, I think. I wouldn't have been surprised at all if Hamilton was asked to give the place back, but instead it was, oh, no, we told him to give the advantage back, and he did, and didn't seem to make any difference. The stewards seemed to think that Hamilton was forced to leave the track by Verstappen. But yeah, I think he got the move more or less done and Hamilton could have continued to follow the track. He made a conscious decision to turn away from the track and bolt across the runoff. And don't know, that just seems like if the roles were reversed, it would have been, it's Max doing that again, and he needs to give the place back. And it would have, if we want to talk about the narrative of the season, it seems like it would have seemed more egregious if the roles were reversed. That was my feeling at the time. That said, I do think that Hamilton's pace being what it was, I don't know how much of a difference it really would have made. I think that they could have given the place back and Hamilton might have got him not long after anyway, or maybe later on in the race, I'm not sure. But I do think Red Bull had a reasonable grievance, and I do think Max should have been given the place because it was a perfectly reasonable move and he kept it within the track. What do you think?
Well, what you said is pretty much what I wrote down in my show notes, and I said something along the lines of, watching the replay, the move was definitely on without a doubt. Did Max run as far wide as possible whilst keeping it on the track? Yeah, he made the car as wide as possible and kept it within the white lines, or kept his left tyres on the track, which is fair in the eyes of the FIA. You can see that he did clip the apex, but also he opened up his steering a little bit and then closed it to make sure that Lewis wasn't going to get around the outside of him. So this is what we've come to see and come to love with Max Verstappen, or hate, depending on what side of the bench you're on. But he's an aggressive driver. He's got a different driving style, and actually it's working for him. And other drivers having to react to it differently. It's hard racing, and we've come to expect this, and it won't change going forward. Max has made that very clear. Did Lewis cut the corner to avoid an incident? Yeah, I feel like if Lewis had hung it around the outside, they would have touched. There was no additional room left for another car. Whether they had to leave room or not, I think is up for discussion, because Max was ahead going into that corner.
I think he made an initial move away. I think he made an initial turn to the right to avoid any specific contact.
Yeah.
He probably could have had a little bump.
But he was off the track. He was off the track by then.
Well,
I think there was quite high sausage curbs on the inside of that track, and look at Monza.
I think he could have followed the track though. I think he could have 100%. I think he could have just ceded the position, and
he's done what Max did, turn one in Saudi Arabia, and gained a huge advantage. Whereas Lewis in Saudi Arabia came back on where he came off, and Max did the opposite. Anyway, so I continue. They would 100% touch if Max didn't back out. Did Lewis gain an advantage rejoining the track? He absolutely did. And I'm really surprised that he wasn't asked to give back that position. But I'm even more surprised that it wasn't even investigated. Because actually, like you said, they were going side by side into that turn. So let's just say there was a tenth or two in between them, like a couple of 100 meters back up the road. Lewis left that corner with a 1.1 second advantage going down that second DRS straight. Of course, DRS wasn't activated because it was the first lap of the race, but 1.1 seconds going into turn 9. How he wasn't asked to slow down and give that time back, or drop it down to within half a second, or switch.
Well, apparently he was.
I didn't see it. I honestly
allegedly he was.
I was glued to the screen for the whole race, and when I saw Lewis ahead of 1.1, I don't think that time went down. I think it just went back up because Lewis did have the pace in the race, like you've already said, and like you also said, I think them switching. Lewis would have only got Max on the following lap and then gained an advantage, as in like drove away because he had the pace throughout in that car. But really surprised me that there was no investigation and that Lewis didn't have to give that position back. I was slightly, I'm quite a big fan of Lewis Hamilton, and it was the World Championship, and obviously being British, I want him to do well. But I was like, hold on a second, that's not right. They should have definitely switched. I want to see that. I want to see it fair, because Max has had to give the position back a couple of times this year, and actually it's only fair that Lewis does.
I don't mind them not doing an investigation, and if they want to do more things in real time, as it were, they want to make decisions on the fly, but those decisions have to be consistent and coherent, and they've not been. So I can understand the desire to want to make it a bit more on the fly and let them race, as they say, is the sort of the phrase of the season.
Yes,
but it doesn't work if the decisions just end up causing more confusion or acrimony amongst the viewers who are sat there going, well, this doesn't seem very fair, and this is obvious to everyone here, but not to the people who have all the data. So you have to admit that there's a lot of information we don't have that they do have. But at the end of the day, the person making those kind of decisions needs to, and presumably is, a fan of racing as well and can see what makes sense in that situation. So I think there was a weird one. Supposedly he was asked to give the advantage back, but it's not just a case of slow down a little bit and that'll do. Max pretty much had the move done. So he slowed down a little bit, so that's made up for it. Just seemed a little bit, it just seemed a little bit weak. Bit of a weak start. Right, what do you want to go on to now?
We're not going to go to the big one yet.
We're not going nuclear just yet.
We're not going nuclear just yet. We're almost keeping this in a bit of a chronological order, which I think's great. It's been a long time since we've done one of those podcasts. Usually we chop and change quite a bit and just go straight to the drama. But actually, the drama was right at the end of the race. For those of you who weren't watching, it's right at the end of the race. Anyway, we're going to talk about the Battle of the Wingmen.
If you weren't watching, why are you listening to this podcast?
Go and watch it.
What you doing?
Yeah.
You stumbled across some random Formula One podcast and you've got about half an hour in. I'm impressed.
Yeah, fair play. Stay tuned though; it gets better. So, for the final time this year, I would like to talk about the Battle of the Wingmen and how each of their races may have impacted the results today. So, Perez undoubtedly did an amazing job holding up Lewis. In fact, he allowed Max to catch up around 7 seconds in just over a lap and a half, which I thought was brilliant. Perez did everything he needed to do and some. So I can't remember what lap it was, but anyway, Perez is in front of Hamilton. Hamilton's caught up. Hamilton overtakes in the DRS straight, and we all think, okay, Perez managed to stall him for a second or two. That's pretty much it. Oh, no.
This is lap 20, by the way.
Lap 20. Thank you very much. So Perez comes straight back and dives up the inside of Hamilton, and I thought, this is amazing. Anyway, that goes on for a whole lap and a half, and Perez manages to slow down Lewis enough so Max can catch up, and Max was 7 seconds behind coming out of the pit stop phase. Now, if Bottas had a better day, could that have made a difference to the outcome in the championship? That's my first question. If Bottas was anywhere near Max throughout the safety car periods, would that have stopped Max and the Red Bull from boxing, knowing that Max would then have to overtake two Mercedes to get past and win the championship? Or would they have stayed out and potentially got track position over Bottas, assuming that Bottas was in P3 when the safety car came out? What do you think?
Well, regarding Bottas's performance, whilst he didn't have a particularly scintillating day under the lights, he had a pretty poor start. It was down 2 places right away. I understand he was really struggling with the engine. I think he was really down on power and may have been dealing with other reliability, performance-based gremlins. So whilst he didn't have a particularly great performance, I don't think his car was giving him everything, whereas he was surrounded by cars that were. And if you look at where he finished, he obviously ended up P6.
6, wasn't it? Yeah.
So ahead of him, he had the 2 AlphaTauris, who have generally been, I think they've, off the top of my head, I feel like they've shown a bit more strength near the end of the season. Sainz, like Ferrari, we know have brought in their new engine and perhaps been doing much better in regards to reliability and performance from that. And then, of course, it's Hamilton and Verstappen. So I think that maybe that is to be considered with Bottas's performance. And could he have had a better day? It's difficult to say, is what I'm saying. Basically, I think it would have been it's difficult to say how much of that is to do with the engine issues he was having. And then what was the other question? It was whether Bottas was close enough to Max during the pit stops. Did you say?
So assuming that Bottas would have been running in P3 like the majority of the year, but within the pit stop window for Max, when the safety car came out, do you think that would have changed Red Bull's decision to box Max onto the fresh set of tyres, knowing that Bottas would probably stayed out and got into P2, and then Max would have had to pass 2 Mercedes for the win? Do you think the absence of Bottas obviously made it a lot easier for Red Bull to play that strategy, knowing that they only had 1 Mercedes to pass?
Yeah, this with that, it's quite a hypothetical scenario, but I think if he's going to have to try and pass 2 cars, then that definitely would have made them think twice about it. But I think they still might have done it because they had nothing to lose. So
it wasn't working for them at the time, was it? Then this is what I kept on saying during the race.
For them, really.
I was like, they had to take these opportunities because chasing and driving wasn't working for them, so they had to try something different.
Yeah, so they might have still gone for it just because Max has not had too much trouble getting past Bottas in the past.
No, true.
As we've seen on quite a few occasions. So there's a few occasions where Bottas has not so much left the door open as opened all the windows as well, and put a lot of neon signs pointing as to which direction to go. Sliding doors and French doors, the whole lot. They're all open, or Finnish doors in this case, I suppose. But yeah, so that obviously would have played an impact. But I think the biggest thing is what you've already mentioned, which is Perez defending. Some of the best defending we've seen all season, absolutely up there with Alonso's defense to keep Hamilton away from Ocon, and in many ways maybe better. But because it's much harder to get past in Hungary, whereas this track is wide and there's big long straights, and I think Perez tactically the way that he approached it was fantastic.
Spot on, wasn't it?
Yeah. I've said it many times this season, but that's why they got Perez in that car, and that's why he's going to be there next year as well. So yeah, fantastic job, and just a great team player. Who'd not want that guy as his teammate if that's the way that he's going to approach it? I'm sure Max was and he is very grateful. He was on the radio, wasn't he, saying Checo's a legend, etc. So yeah. But that played a huge impact as well, of course, because if Verstappen hadn't been able to catch up that amount, then later on in the race, I think Hamilton would have had the gap to have a free pit stop.
True.
So that would have completely changed. I mean, it would have been over. It just would have been completely over. So that was probably there's all the what happened later on and the sort of the luck and the circumstance and the stewards, etc., FIA, blah 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 blah. But that's not the only factor.
Oh no, there's a lot
of
factors
contention for the win. So and I'm glad that you've said that, because it is being talked about as if it's this one thing that has manipulated the entire thing. And I get it; it is the single biggest factor, but it's not the only factor. The race is long, and also there's the whole rest of the season to consider. So yeah, it's that's a big factor for why Max was even in contention to be close enough after the whole safety car debacle in the first place. Was Perez's incredible defense and slowing Hamilton down.
I think you make such a valid point, actually, because if Hamilton had got past Perez straight away, there would have been an additional 8 or 9 seconds on Verstappen. There would have been like a 25-second gap when Latifi put it in the wall, allowing Hamilton and Mercedes to box for a fresh set of soft tyres with no consequences whatsoever. But it was actually because Perez slowed down Hamilton so much that actually they took that opportunity, they took that strategy away from Mercedes. And we've said this time and time again this year, how the wingmen, Bottas and Perez, have played such a crucial part. And we've seen it where it's been one Mercedes and 2 Red Bulls, and the Red Bulls have dominated. And we've seen it when there's been 2 Mercedes and 1 Red Bull, and the Mercedes have dominated. It's a team game. And fair play to Perez, because he's done that team an absolute solid. So yeah, very impressed. That's not to say that Bottas hasn't done some incredible things this year, because he's had a decent year as well. Not as good as previous years, but he's played his part. He's obviously won the Constructors' Championship, which everyone seems to have forgot about, especially Mercedes.
Including Mercedes.
They haven't even celebrated it yet. In fact, their Twitter bio...
that's what they were doing, wasn't it? That's what those celebration videos are. They're celebrating winning the Constructors. Arguably, that's the bigger championship, because it's the one that gives them all the money. And
yes,
I know the Drivers' Championship is the kind of the emblematic championship of Formula One, but the Constructors' Championship is arguably the bigger one for the teams, and they won that pretty handily. So
what they want to be putting on social media, or what they have put on social media, is very little with regards to their Constructors' Championship. In fact, their Twitter bio still says the home of the 7-time Constructors' Champions. And what is now on social media is numerous videos of Toto Wolff having an absolute, I don't know what the word to use, like amazing time in one of the Abu Dhabi's clubs, singing with all his, I can assume his colleagues, and having a great time because they have won the Constructors' Championship. And the penny finally dropped. Probably goes, oh, we've just won a lot of money. We're set up pretty nicely for next year. Let's reset. But if you didn't know, and you're not on Twitter, there's Mercedes are contacting everyone who's put that video on their feed, asking them for their email address and asking them to remove said video. So I think there's a bit of a PR nightmare going on. And if Mercedes
must
weren't
be their
already
first time on the internet,
oh goodness,
you can't just ask people politely to take it down.
To remove.
We need your email addresses. It's on the internet. Once it's on the internet, it's there forever.
I've seen it on Reddit. I've seen it on Twitter. I've seen it on TikTok. That video will be iconic. That video will be around for a long,
What's wrong
long
with
time.
having a little party? Like,
Exactly.
Just enjoy, just
He's
enjoy
had a
yourselves.
stressful year. He's had a stressful day.
No shame in that.
Exactly. I forgot where we were, but yeah, fantastic battle of the wingmen. We always said that they would play into the championship battle, and Perez did everything he needed to do and more this weekend, from qualifying to the race to holding up Lewis. And unfortunately, he had to retire towards the end of the race because of reliability issues, or Red Bull were worried that reliability issues would cause a safety car or whatnot. How ironic is that? But boxed Perez, and he sat and watched the drama unfold. Arguably, he had a better view because he could watch it live on TV and with his crew rather than sat back down in P5 or 6 where he probably would have ended up in the race. But fantastic job from Perez. Brilliant drive, and definitely contender for driver of the day.
Yeah, incredible defensive drive, and I think Perez, as he gets more comfortable with that car and with that team next season, depending obviously on the state of the car itself, we assume that it's another potential championship fighting car. I wonder if now that Max has got his title, Perez might get more of a shout in taking some wins and higher positions himself, because obviously he's been the ultimate wingman in a few of these situations, like Bottas has, to ensure that championship win. And I wonder now that he's got it, if I don't know, it might change the dynamic a bit. We'll see.
What is really nice to see is Max in a press conference afterwards said, "I wouldn't have won this championship without Checo." And I thought, you know what?
Certainly not. Certainly, we've just said,
it's completely true. It's completely true. But actually, you're at the height of your career. You've just accomplished your lifelong dream of becoming an F1 world champion at the age of 24, may I add. And he took the time, and I think anyone would do, but he's got a lot going on, a lot of celebration, a lot of drinking. But he took the time to congratulate his teammate and actually publicly thank him in such a way which wasn't, "Oh, thank you very much for Perez for helping out this year." He actually put down the championship to the help of his teammate. And I thought that was such a lovely touch. And we saw a lot of gratitude and people being humble this weekend, especially after the race. We saw the Hamiltons go up to the Verstappens and shake their hand and consolidate them. And I thought that was great. Not consolidate them. Hamilton's going up to the Verstappens and shake their hand and congratulate them, and vice versa. There was a lot of hugging, and I thought that was really nice to see. So amongst all the controversy and the hatred on social media and all that, actually the people which are impacted the most seem to have just rised above it and got on with it, and they'll reset, and they'll be back hopefully next year.
I told you I wasn't going to go anywhere near social media after the
You
the
didn't.
last
You were
race.
completely radio silent.
No, I was like, I'm not going anywhere near any of this.
It's horrid,
going to be an absolute mess.
I tell you what, I was browsing social media waiting for this podcast to start, and it is still horrendous. Like I've also put some things on social media, and I've tried to remain impartial. And you can follow me to check that I'm remaining impartial. It's just what I think is quite factual. But there are some horrible people out there. It's a toxic place. I can't wait for all this to blow over and we can start the new year on a fresh slate. Do you reckon that will happen? Do you reckon F1 Twitter will just get along in the new year with the new season? Oh, I don't.
Well,
think
the thing about the nature of people on platforms like Twitter is that their anger and their vitriol is only beaten out by the shortness of their memories. Because I'm sure that given a period of time, it'll move on, and they'll find something else to hate and be angry about. So it's there's no shortage of things to be angry about in the world. So there's plenty of ammunition. I understand why people are annoyed about it, but I guess this is kind of a talking point actually before we press the button, as it were, and talk about the incident itself. And that's that my perspective on this is that I don't have any particular skin in the game here, because I said beforehand, may the best man win. And I think the best man did win. I think that Max Verstappen is a deserving champion. I think he has been the better driver all season. He's got more wins. He's got more pole positions. He's been outrageously consistent.
More podiums.
He holds the record for the most podiums in a season.
Yeah.
So, it goes without saying that Max is an absolutely deserving winner and has been incredible. all season. Even if some of the moves that he's made has been stretching the definition of hard racing in places, I think that if he had not been so overly aggressive and even reckless in a couple of occasions, I think he would have won the championship before Abu Dhabi. And of course, there was Baku, where he suffered that tyre blowout. That wasn't his fault. That should have been an easy win, really.
Silverstone was avoidable.
Silverstone, arguably was avoidable. I still think that it is Hamilton's fault for the collision.
Yeah.
But yeah, he could have been more conservative, perhaps.
Yeah, and of course,
he could have been more conservative.
Hungary, he was subject to a bowling Bottas, which of course wasn't his fault at all, but effectively ended his race.
Yeah, so but other than those examples, it's P1, P2, P1, P2, P2,
and there's
P2,
no P3.
P1, P1.
So he holds the podium record in one season, and that is just in first and second. He hasn't finished P3 at all this year. He's either first or second, or he's DNF'd. That's crazy.
So Max, undeniably a deserving champion, but also I feel like it bears saying that at the end of the day, it is a car race. And I've mentioned before about the language of people talking about injustice and that kind of thing. I feel like that language should be reserved for genuine, real, there are real big problems in the world. The world is a scary place sometimes. And it's kind of happened and I'm just happy to move on. And I know that it doesn't involve the team that I support, but I think even if it did, I would have moved on by now. Easily, I would have moved on. I would have woken up this morning and been like, never mind, another day, let's get on with it. Whereas, like you say, there's all these people on Twitter that just are not prepared to let it go. This is the biggest problem in the world. We must gnash our teeth and display how angry the sport has been ruined forever. For me, I mean, okay, fair enough. I mean, my perspective is that Formula One has always been a pretty ridiculous soap opera, maybe the biggest soap opera in the whole of sport. And that's kind of why I like it, because it's so ridiculous. Silly season is the whole season in Formula One and always has been. There's always ridiculous controversies, and this is just the latest one. And it's a particularly controversial one, as we will talk about. And it's not because there are no problems and because there aren't things that need to change. And we'll talk about, what individually we would like to see differently. Perhaps they might end up being the same thing. We don't know. But I do think it bears saying that we should all calm down and be prepared to move on a little bit. Like I said at the beginning of this, because I think that people are going to do themselves a mischief if they carry on like this, with this kind of anger and vitriol. Even Nicholas Latifi was receiving hate mail.
Yeah, that's not fair.
Come on. That's ridiculous. The poor guy just made a mistake and binned it and caused a safety car. And there's people having a go at him as if it's his fault. Oh dear. I don't know if it's necessarily a new thing to the human condition and to people in this world. I think it's just things like Twitter and the like have given those individuals a platform to have
talk
their
with no consequences.
Yeah, exactly, and to have their ridiculous opinions justified. Everyone wants their slice of the attention pie, and they intend to get theirs by stabbing their fork into it and yanking it away while screaming that it's theirs.
I'd like to reiterate, I haven't been that bad. There are some awful people on Twitter at the moment, sending hate.
I don't know. Should we have a look? Should we have a look and see if we can rip into Shane's Twitter?
Hold on,
Twitter
at Shane5781. I hate Verstappen. He didn't deserve the championship. Okay, I'm done. No, I'm joking. My problems is and always has been with the inconsistencies of the FIA and how bizarre this situation was, and how I would have happily seen Max win the championship. I think I've said a couple of times on the podcast how it is the best man win. And I am British and I want Hamilton to do well, and an 8th world championship would be ridiculous, but it's a world record. It's a record breaking championship. But actually Max has done a better job this year and has been far more consistent than the Mercedes. But yeah, it's just the inconsistencies of the FIA, which we've mentioned time and time again over this whole season. And unfortunately, I think you mentioned last podcast, wouldn't it be hilarious if we had this post-race discussion about, appeals and stewards' investigations into the actual finishing order? And I somehow we've ended up in this situation, but hopefully it's almost been put to bed. We're still waiting for Mercedes to withdraw or proceed with their appeal of the stewards' investigation. But we'll talk about that because that's post-race, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in the podcast in a while. Alex, I feel like even though that was your talking point, I kind of want to hand back to you. And I want, if it's okay with you, to talk through from lap 52 all the way through to 58, because you're very impartial, you're very methodical, you're very, unbiased. And I as much as I try to say I'm unbiased, I probably won't come across as being unbiased. So do you want to take us through the last 6 laps and you talk to us about what you feel was okay and all strange, or whether you thought it was all okay under the governing body, or whether you thought some things were a little bit odd, and what's your thoughts and opinions? And then I'll chime in as and when with my thoughts.
Well, I'm very flattered by your description. I don't think I would describe myself as impartial or unbiased. I just have different biases.
More unbiased than I.
Yeah. Well, firstly, did we really expect consistency at the end of the season that we just had?
No. Yeah.
I think that the season has ended as it has been throughout. I was going to make a big list, but I honestly just kind of couldn't be asked, because it's such a big list of things where things that have happened where you think this doesn't make any sense. It clearly it says in the rules they're supposed to do this, or rules or no rules. It makes sense if the race director has some kind of authority in this position. It seems like the decision is obvious to everyone except the people that are actually making the decision.
Yeah.
Or nobody's been paying attention, etc., etc. So the whole season has been like that. For it to end that way, I must admit that I spent the last few laps basically just laughing in disbelief because of how ridiculous it was. It was pretty farcical, but incredibly entertaining. I was thoroughly entertained by the end of this
will
race.
Be loving this.
Yeah, they probably. I mean, they can't dramatize it anymore. At least they don't really need to fake anything this time.
Yes,
because
yes.
What would you need to fake?
You've got everything.
Yeah, the truth is stranger than fiction in this case, I suppose. I'm actually more annoyed that Norris had to pit again. Otherwise, he might have been on that podium instead of Sainz. If I'm annoyed about anything about the end of the race, it's that. But anyway, a couple of important things to do with this then. So I do think that Michael Massey did the right thing to avoid the race ending under a safety car. I think that was a good thing, because if the championship had ended under a safety car, that's just such a pathetic way to finish any race, really. I would even go as far to say that I don't think it should even be possible for a race to finish under the safety car, apart from inclement weather conditions, perhaps. But the idea that a race can finish under a safety car is just pathetic. I think, considering what was at stake, what they should have done is just immediately red flag the session.
Yes.
And just have a 5-lap sprint to the end.
Yes.
I mean, what a good advert for sprint races as well.
Yes,
if that's what they want to go ahead with.
Absolutely.
And because of the silly rules, everyone can change their tyres. So you get this, back to the beginning again. And it
would have been epic.
That in itself. I mean, that in itself is a manipulation. That word has been used a lot in regards to this thing. But that in itself is a manipulation. I would argue that every safety car is a manipulation of the race results, because you're taking the race and you're pushing all the cars together in a completely fabricated fashion for the sake of safety. So, I think that there's a lot of manipulation that goes on in the part of the race for various necessary reasons. And that doing the red flag and having that sprint at the end is one way that you might have done it. Certainly seems like it might have been a more fair and probably certainly more exciting way as well. But, I think that would have been the best option, but it wasn't what happened. It wasn't what we saw. What we saw was far more confusing and bizarre, and maybe even a little bit embarrassing. First, let's talk about the other hypothetical alternative outcomes that we might have seen, because we could have seen them keep all of the cars that were lapped stay in their original positions, and Verstappen would have had to have get past, was it 5 cars?
It was 5 cars, yep.
5 cars. So he would have had to get past 5 cars, but they all would have immediately received blue flags.
Under blue flags, yeah.
Now, it seems to me that the people in those cars probably would have got jumped out of the way pretty quickly, considering the circumstances. It's also possible that they would have had 1 extra lap if they'd done that as well, I think, maybe. I can't remember exactly how it happened, but they might have had 1 extra lap as well. But I think it's possible that, given that Verstappen had the softer tyres and was clearly very fast, in that situation, and those cars would have gotten out of the way. I think he might have still got Hamilton,
Yeah, I agree.
even if he'd had to get past those cars. So if they'd left it as it was, it might have still ended in that fashion.
Because
Just because of the way the
believe
safety car compresses everyone together.
those 5 cars would have been overtaken by the newly laid turn 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. The old chicane, which is now like just almost like a hairpin, but quite a wide one going in.
I mean, they would have got right out the way, wouldn't they?
I reckon
They'd
by
be on
that
the plow
corner,
saying, "There's Max Verstappen, right? Get out the way! It's the last bit of the race."
They would have driven off the track to get out of the way, and I reckon Max would have been ahead of those cars by the start of the first DRS straight.
So it seems to me that even if they were there, Verstappen still might have taken the lead of the race. That might have seemed a slightly more reasonable way for him to take the championship, but it's not what we saw. Another hypothetical outcome is that, of course, they could have got all of the lapped cars to move out of the way, and that way the race would have finished almost certainly under the safety car. I understand that all of the teams agreed that they didn't want that, and Michael Massey was quite determined to follow that understanding. Obviously, they agreed that before the circumstances that we saw, but Michael Massey seemed pretty determined to follow that, and I do think that's the good call. Like, to finish it under the safety car just seems pathetic. Now, what did they do? Well, they obviously asked only the cars that were between Hamilton and Verstappen to be unlapped. And a lot of people have been, posting screenshots of the rules and saying, look, it says this, and you have to do that, and this is what the rules say, and it's all to do... I mean, I'm not going to read the rules out, because if you've probably seen them by now if you've been going on Twitter and reading all this stuff. It's all to do with... there's it's like 43 point something. I don't know the exact ones that it is. But it's all to do with when cars may overtake and when overtaking will not be permitted and all the rest of it. The only outs that I can see in the rules in those specific bits to do with the safety car that they might have drawn on is something like, if they consider the track conditions are unsuitable for overtaking, they can deliver the message overtaking will not be permitted. And that maybe gives them some technical leeway to only allow certain cars to overtake. There's also 48.8 where it says that... with the exception of the cases listed under 8H below, no driver may overtake another car on the track, including the safety car, until he passes the line, see Article 5.3, for the first time, after the safety car has returned to the pits. And the exceptions are, and I only need to list the first one because it's the only one that's relevant, which is if a driver is signalled to do so from the safety car. And that's exactly what happened. They put on the little green light that allows the person behind them to overtake, and then they can presumably just turn it off again and not allow the next person to overtake as a result. But I think the important one, and it is the one that they mentioned in the steward's notes, or this is their justification, if you like. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't tell you whether this is going to hold up in the Court of Appeal or whatever, but the one that they seem to draw on is to do with 15.3, which is not about the safety car, but about the officials themselves, but about Michael Massey and the clerk of the course and all this sort of wording. But it basically says that the race director has overriding authority in the following matters, and that the clerk of the course can give orders in respect to them only with his express permission or express agreement. Now, it lists 5 matters in which the race director has overruling authority, and the first 3, which are to do with the control of practice in the race and the timetable, stopping any cars, and stopping of any session and race and basically like that. They all use the wording in accordance with the code or sporting regulations. But the last 2 are simply listed the starting procedure and the use of the safety car. And they don't mention having to do it in accordance with the code or sporting regulations. So the wording there suggests, and this is merely an interpretation because very often that is what one has to do when you look at sporting rules. You interpret them rather than see them as cold, hard facts. Many of these are interpretations. That seems to suggest that when it comes to the use of the safety car, Michael Massey can do basically whatever he likes. Now, is that the right decision? Should the rules be written that way? No, I don't think that they should be. I think that's pretty vague and, gives him a lot of power, a lot of authority. It gives one person the ability to do a bit too much. And I understand the need for flexibility. I understand the need but the rules cannot be written to take into account every single possible scenario. The only way you could write perfectly fixed, objective rules is to be able to see the future. Because sport is unpredictable. Strange things happen. It's very difficult to write rules where you can account for everything. So usually it helps to have one person who can just make a decision in that scenario. So I understand the need for that. But in terms of the use of the safety car, that's super vague. But that's, I think, what they're using to say, well, actually, Michael Massey can do what he likes in regards to the safety car. So, in summary, I don't agree that they broke the rules because the rules technically say that Michael Massey can do what he wants with the safety car. That's my interpretation. Maybe we can talk in a little bit about what we think the rules should be and how they should change and how they might look differently in next year. But Shane, I'll turn over to you for your interpretation of the events.
So this is why I wanted you to talk first, because actually listening to you is like, just settled me down ever so slightly, and it's just good to listen to what I think is an impartial decision. Obviously, you find all the facts, and
I still think it's stupid as hell.
It is.
I still think they made the worst possible decision that upset everybody apart from Red Bull and Red Bull fans.
Yeah, I mean, let's
I
talk
don't
about
think
this.
they broke the rules. I think technically the rules gives them the leeway to do whatever the hell they like. Unfortunately,
so, I agree. They didn't break the rules. Is what they did correct? I don't think so whatsoever. Only allowing 5 cars through, I thought, was really strange because actually. Daniel Ricciardo, it's never happened before, but Daniel Ricciardo was one of the biggest losers today other than Lewis Hamilton. All the lap cars in front of him were allowed to unlap themselves on lap 57. Daniel was one of the drivers who took the advantage of the safety car and boxed for a fresh set of softs. So actually under what we usually see from a safety car experience, Daniel Ricciardo is in a really good position on a fresh set of soft tyres. He could have made some moves going into the final lap. But he was denied that opportunity because actually all the cars ahead of him were able to unlap themselves, which was strange. Strange for him, he mentioned on the radio, and just a strange set of circumstances because I've only been watching Formula 1 for 12, 13 years, but I've not seen that before. And I'm going to ask you, have you seen a certain amount of safety cars, certain amount of cars being able to unlap themselves at any point, or is it usually all or none?
No, I've never seen that happen before, not that I can remember. I've never seen the specifics. Because they did specifically say these cars to overtake, which to their credit, they were specific. They didn't say overtake and then suddenly say, no, don't stop overtaking the safety car. They did list specifically which cars they wanted to do it. Felt a bit sorry for Sainz because it meant that he wasn't in a position to potentially battle for P2 because there were still lap cars in front of him. But whether or not he really would have done that, I don't know. But yeah, it's a weird one. It's a
strange set of circumstances which we haven't been presented with before for as long as we can remember. And collectively, we've been watching for Formula 1 for probably 15 to 20 years now. And, there's a lot of people who've been watching it a lot longer and haven't seen these circumstances. Having a finite amount of cars unlap themselves to bring the two championship contenders to bring them together. That was the objective, was to bring those two cars together. And I feel sorry for those lap cars because it's not like they could drive around and get back to the back of the pack and all form up in line. They were fighting themselves on that last lap. And like you said, people were out of position. A lot of people were denied an opportunity to fight for Constructor Championship points, even though they had boxed for a fresh set of soft tyres, Daniel Ricciardo being one of the biggest losers. So let's just run through what happened. At 18, this is all in local time, by the way, local to Abu Dhabi. So at 18:27, a message pops up saying lap cars will not be allowed to overtake. Everyone's on the same field. Everyone's got the same message. It comes up on everyone's dash. It comes up on the pit wall. The engineers are communicating with their drivers. Everyone's all squared away. Christian Horner gets on the radio, and I'm sure Toto Wolff is on the radio at the same time. But Christian Horner says, Michael, we just need one lap without lap cars. And that was at 18:29. So 2 minutes after a message came up about cars not being able to overtake. Do apologise. 18:31, a message pops up saying lap cars between Lewis and Max, 5 cars only, are allowed to pass. And it details specifically what cars by the number of their car. And then also on 18:31, safety car in this lap. So what I found almost as strangely interesting is we've always had lap cars can unlap themselves and then they go around, they join up the back, and then the safety car, once those cars have joined up, will then tail in that lap. A lap later is mentioned in the regulations. But of course, this ultimate clause where the race director has complete control over the safety car completely mitigates what we know and expect previously in previous races. But those lap cars drove past the safety car, and then it was within 10 seconds. This is all happening in sector 3. The safety car was going to peel in this lap. So, of course, that was unusual. Like, we were expecting to have, obviously, we were looking to have one more lap of racing, but these special set of circumstances towards the end of this race, we haven't really seen before. And I think that's what's aggravated a lot of people, and especially the teams as well, because we've come to expect the safety car to peel in a lap after the lap cars have gone through, as it mentions in the regulations. We expect all cars to be let through, as it mentions in the regulations. But obviously everyone missed the fact that actually this clause, which you mentioned earlier, Michael Massey, the race director, is in complete control of the safety car. And yes, I agree. It shouldn't have ended on a yellow lap, on a safety car lap. What the answer was, maybe they should have unlapped all the cars to begin with. Maybe they should have red flagged the race to begin with. Maybe they should have done a virtual safety car, so all the time deficit all the time made up was all the same. I don't know, but it was just, it's hard.
It's that they changed their minds as well. That's the other thing, is that they said no one's going to overtake. Actually, these specific cars should overtake, and it just contributed to the ridiculous and slightly unprofessional nature of the whole thing.
And I think that's what bugs a lot of people, that actually those last 3 laps, those last 4 minutes, we've gone from not allowing any cars to overtake to then only a certain amount of cars being able to overtake. Those cars not being able to catch up to the back of the pack, and then a safety car coming in immediately at the end of that lap, allowing a final racing lap. It's something we haven't seen before. It's something we didn't expect to happen, because we all know what the safety car procedure is. We all, they don't have to allow the cars to overtake if it's not safe to do so. That's not within the rules. What we've come to expect is either all the cars or none of the cars. And it was just because it was different. Yes, I agree it was in the rules. Was it within the sporting? Was it sporting to do what he did or do what happened? I don't think so. I would have rather seen Max personally go fly past those 5 lap cars, catch Lewis on the second DRS straight. Both of them have an absolute ding-dong battle into turn 9, and then one of them goes off into the 3rd sector and wins the championship. That would have been amazing. But it was just how... It's a shame that it ended in such a way where it almost was kind of forced. It felt like... You'd have to be blind if you said that Mercedes didn't look like the stronger car for the last 10 laps. They were 14 seconds ahead.
The thing is that it was going to be forced no matter what. It was going to be forced no matter what, because the Latifi's crash meant that there had to be a safety car. So then whatever you do next is going to be forced, because you've either got to make... Michael Massey and the people with him must have realised that they were essentially deciding who was going to be world champion. Now,
because you're pitting Max Verstappen on one lap fresh soft tyres against Lewis Hamilton on 40 old lap hard tyres.
Which leads me to think maybe they didn't even consider the red flag option. Maybe they didn't even think of doing that. I don't. Who knows what goes on in the room that they're in? But
ironically,
go on. Well, it's just a matter of it being just being forced no matter what. Because if, let's say, they'd done a red flag, I mean that's pretty forced, isn't it? You're just They didn't need a red flag. It wasn't necessary for there to be a red flag. Each team an
equal opportunity. And I've been dead against red flags, and how I find this completely insane that last week on the podcast I was talking about how cars shouldn't be allowed to change their tyres on the red flag. And now this week I'm talking about actually they should have thrown a red flag. They should have allowed Mercedes and Red Bull to box, put a fresh set of tyres on, and just have a sprint race towards the end. I can't believe how I changed my opinion in a matter of 8 days.
I mean, I'd still see that rule changed.
Yeah,
tyres or no tyres, just a 5-lap sprint at the end would have been better. That would have been the best sort of possible outcome, I think.
It just wasn't the ending anyone was expecting, and it was a shame that it ended in such a way where it was unusual for the race director. It was just created. It was just fabricated. It just felt like it was forced. It felt like the racing was gone and it was more for the drama. This was perfect for advertising. This is perfect for TV series. This is perfect for the books and the montages, because it was the final lap, the final race, or the final corner. The 2 championship contenders go against it. And I think, well, actually, 2008 was pretty epic, and that was all authentic. This felt like it was forced. And I would have loved it if Max had won. And when he crossed the line and won, I was like, you know what? I had a little grin on my face. I thought, he has been the better driver this year. He has outperformed that Mercedes. He probably would have won it a race or two ago if it hadn't been for Hungary and Silverstone and Monza. But I just felt like a little bit cheated. Like Lewis had no leg to stand on because it was just strange. It was a strange set of circumstances, and I really hope those set of circumstances don't appear again in Formula One because it really took the shine out of the day for me.
You think Michael Massey just?
I think he'll end up quitting.
Well, do you think though at the time that he just had enough? I got the tone of his voice. I mean, this is just my interpretation of it, but I just got the sense that he was just totally fed up. And at the end, when Toto was like, this isn't right, you've got to do such and such or whatever. And Michael Massey was like, we went motor racing.
Oh yeah, I know. We didn't go motor racing. Like we didn't go motor racing.
That's so funny.
I hated that. I hated hearing Toto on the radio and like begging like a child.
Michael, no.
No safety car. No safety car. All of this stuff, even from the beginning of the race. But I can't defend the FIA.
I just found the whole thing hilarious, I got to say. I just thought it was hilarious.
I hated it. I absolutely hated it. From cars not being able to overtake to Christian Horner saying we just need one lap without lap cars. 2 minutes later, all the lap cars between him and Lewis had disappeared. And then the safety car came in on that lap. It just felt like it was orchestrated and Lewis never stood a chance.
It's called a motor race, Shane.
It's not called a motor race.
We went motor racing. It's a car race. That's what we did.
I can't believe I've agreed to not talk about this after this podcast.
We went motor racing.
I can't let it go. I can't let it go. It just kills me inside that.
And then there's an image that somebody posted. There's an image that somebody posted of him leaving as well after it. He's literally just got his suitcase. He's just off. He's had enough. I've had enough of this.
Red Bull's money and Red Bull. It's just, oh man, it was such a strange way to end the season. Words do not describe how that's come about.
Let's move on. I think let's talk about what we want to see change for next year. Then let's briefly kind of touch on maybe what we want to see differently going forward based on this incident. Because first and foremost, I understand the perspective of some people who maybe see F1 as being led down a path of pure entertainment over sporting competition. And you already mentioned that they're sort of doing it for the drama, they're doing it for the TV. And I understand that point of view. I think that, as I said earlier, F1 has always been a soap opera. It's always been a ridiculous soap opera.
Not to this level.
Well, again, I think that maybe not in this way. This is a very unique set of circumstances. But what's different about F1 now is that it's far more transparent and better understood by the average fan than it has ever been before. We didn't have access to all of these radios and hearing what they say to the FIA and just the way that it's shot. Even if you just look at the way that it's shot these days, it's filmed in a way to kind of give it a certain narrative as well, in a way that it wasn't in the past. So I don't think that F1 has necessarily become more of a soap opera in the way that it is as a sport, but rather the way that it is presented, the way that it is talked about, the way that the media talks about it, the fact that everyone talks about it on social media and the kind of presentation that has, and the way that on social media, and I suppose in modern media in general, there is a certain currency to be had in being very emotional and very histrionic about lots of stuff. That's that gets you your clicks, doesn't it? The clickbait. If you do something that gets people going, you won't believe this particular thing. That's what gets people going, rather than here is a very interesting set of correct and verifiably true statistics that we have collaborated on with over the past 10 years with a set of scholars, and that doesn't really get people going in the same way, does it? So I think it's fair to say that the way that F1 has been presented has changed, and it's much more transparent now, and that can be a good thing because it means that out of this radio conflict between team principals and the like, for example, now that we see it too, we can make it clear what we like and what we don't like, and we can kind of call it out and hold it to account in a way that fans kind of couldn't before. I think that people can be, it is in a way a good thing that people can be more vocal about what they do and don't like about the sport, because we know much more about it in a way that we didn't before. So I hope that transparency encourages a little bit more calculated professionalism over the radio. I hope that fans will use their voice to constructively hold the powers that be to account, rather than just in a merely cathartic manner, raging and getting angry at people. I think that team principals and the like should not be able to speak to the race director during the race. This whole sort of like pleading with them not to bring out a safety car, it's just wasting the guy's time. He's got a job to do, and he's got Toto Wolff in his ear going, "Michael, no, don't do this. You're not supposed to do that." Let him do his job. It's like the TV presenters bothering the team principals in the middle of the race. They're trying to do their job, and they're asking them, "Well, what do you think they're going to do? What's your strategy going to be to this?" Like, yeah, we're just going to reveal our strategy over the TV as to what we're going to do. And there needs to be less bothering of people while they're trying to do their jobs in general. And I think that goes for the radio. There's also the rules they will always require a certain amount of interpretation, but consistency has been the biggest problem this season. I think we probably need the same stewards for every race. That would be a good change that we could see, because the fact that they're different every time means of course you're not going to get consistency, because you don't have consistent stewards, so you're not going to get consistent stewarding. That seems pretty logical. And finally, from my side, I think Michael Massey needs to step down, because as much as I very much respect the near impossible job that he's taken on, the fact remains that he bears ultimate responsibility for a season of confusion and frustration in regards to the rules of racing. And to allow him to continue in that role might see us going into a new era of regulations with a shaky trust in the authorities to keep the rules at least somewhat coherent. So if we want a truly clean slate going into 2022, I think Michael Massey should call it a day, or at the very least, maybe help steward in, if you'll pardon the pun, someone new to provide a clean slate for the new regulations.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with every point you make, especially I don't think the team principals should be able to bother the FIA at all, or the race director at all during the race. They should be able to maybe make things aware to the stewards, but it's a one-way. It's not a conversation. It's you have 10 seconds to get or 10 or 20 seconds to get your piece across. It has to be professional. It has to be polite. There's no shouting. There's no screaming. There's no begging down the radio. It's like, are you considering this? Yes or no? Yes, we are. Brilliant. Okay, it's in your hands. It's with the stewards. It's with the FIA. That has been taken care of. We will no longer bother you. We respect your decision, whatever way it goes. Consistency throughout the panel. This is the pinnacle of motorsport, and we do not have a consistent panel of stewards or race officials, and I think that needs to change. Like, there's a lot of money in Formula One, so let's spend a bit and let's get this. Let's try and eliminate all the inconsistencies we've seen this year, because, like you said, with different panels every single week, there's going to be inconsistencies. People have watched different races. People have watched different seasons. They might be reflecting on something which happened in 2016, where the person next to him or the person next week might be reflecting on something which happened in 2020. So consistent stewarding through a consistent panel, I think, would be really beneficial to the sport. And with regards to Michael Massey, he had the impossible task of stepping in quite late, with quite late notice at the end of, was it beginning of last season, where the late great Charlie Whiting died? Was it January? Just before pre-season test, or just before the Australian Grand Prix was meant to go ahead? That was it. It was just before COVID, because we haven't had an Australian Grand Prix in a while now. And Michael Massey stood up to the impossible task. And I think we've kind of gone into a new era when we've got this amazing driver, Max Verstappen, who's pushing the limits of what is acceptable on the racetrack. And I think those limits have been pushed to 120%. I think they need to be dialed back to 100%. I think Max just needs to dial it in ever so slightly, because I think what he's doing occasionally is over the limit. But at the moment, there's been no consequence, and it's been allowed to happen, and thus for it will continue happening. Now, I'm not saying he's a dangerous driver. I'm not saying he's going to hurt someone. But what I'm saying is it's not really sporting the way he's driving, and he is pushing the limits, and I think he's over the limits, but only by like 10 or 20%. He just needs to dial it back ever so slightly, and to dial it back, we need a consistent race director. We need a director who's prepared to put his foot down and say, no, that was wrong. You need to leave the space. You shouldn't have forced Hamilton off there, or you should have left the space here. You cut the corner here. Don't do it again. this will be consistent. And he needs to do that in the first race of the year and remain consistent for the whole year. And hopefully we'll get a little bit of respect. From hearing the team principals on the radio to Michael Massey and hearing the drivers complain about his decisions, I'd be both Max and Lewis are, Lewis saying it was manipulated, and you've got Lewis saying, you've got Max saying, of course, these cars aren't going to be unlapped. Of course, what a decision! It was a classic decision by the FIA or by the director. There's no respect there, or there's definitely a lack of respect there, and that should not be the case for the guy who's governing this race. You don't see rugby players take the mickey or backchat a rugby referee or an umpire because
if
it
you
just
want an
does not
example
happen.
of good officialing, take a look at rugby. That's
It just does not happening, and every single player respects their decision whether they like it or not, because if they don't, they'll be straight off, because that's not how the sport is governed, and that needs to happen in Formula One. There needs to be a line, and you can race as close to that line as you want, but as soon as you go over it, it's a 5-second penalty, or the punishment is whatever it is, and that will be the same for any driver, whether you're in a Haas or whether you're in a Mercedes, or I don't know why I refer to Mercedes now, or Red Bull, arguably the best car on the grid now. Those punishments will be the same, and they will keep on happening until those rules are respected. So,
of course, the tricky bit there is the nature of the line that you're talking about, which is that not a lot of people can decide on where that line is.
Well, they're going to have to.
I think crucially, whoever ends up making that decision, their line needs to be one that people will respect.
Absolutely.
So it needs to be somebody who is a respectable figure, and I think Michael Massey has, like you say, has lost the respect of a lot of people. And
as long as they go into next year,
continue.
And for example, say Sergio Perez pushes Bottas wide or pushes George Russell wide going into the first race next year, and Russell goes off into the gravel, goes off and has to, has an advantage or has lost an advantage. Those positions need to be switched. And if that happens again throughout the season, it's the same punishment. It's the same set of consequences. Let's not allow it to happen one time, or the next time, okay, you just have to give back the time, or the time after that, okay, you just have to switch to positions. That's 3 different outcomes, and it's probably happened in the last 3 races. Let's make sure it's consistent. Just consistency. And I think having the same panel and having respect for the race director would really, really improve that.
Also, just a bit of breaking news.
Oh no!
On the podcast, in regards to what we're talking about here, apparently Ross Brawn has revealed that F1 will stop team principals from being able to contact the race director mid-race starting next season.
I think that's fair enough. Step 1
so
done.
So I think that's a good thing. It's just, like we mentioned before with other sports, if say if a if a manager was to go running over to the 4th official in football and start berating them and have a go, they'd be sent into the stands.
Yeah.
They'd be like, no, get out of here. You're not part of this anymore. And that just doesn't happen in Formula One. They can just berate the race director as much as they like, and it's just wasting his time and wasting resources. And it's pathetic. It's really childish. It's not a good look for the sport. And we've seen, when we started seeing those FIA messages, we were like, oh, it's getting juicy, and it did get juicy, but not quite in the way that I hoped that it would. It became a bit childish. Rather than getting the kind of behind the scenes information, what we were hearing was grown men bickering. There's something very pathetic about grown men bickering. But we also get to hear, and I think this is important as well, as just after the result with Verstappen over the radio and all the rest of it, we also get to hear grown men telling that they love each other on live TV. Yeah. That doesn't happen very often. I think there's something to be said for that. So, we get the rough with the smooth, I suppose. But team principals won't be able to talk to the race director in the middle of the race next season. Hopefully that will be the case, and we can at least pass over one of these slightly embarrassing parts of the new transparency of the sport.
Absolutely. I love the little graphic, and when it started this season, Mercedes to the FIA or Red Bull to the FIA, I thought, this is really interesting. I really hope this stays. We want to hear more of this. And half a year later, I was like, I don't want to hear any more of this. This is embarrassing for the sport. We've got grown men crying or begging on the radio saying, don't do a safety car. Let the cars unlap themselves. We only need one more lap. Do what I tell you to do. And I just think, actually, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And actually, there might not be an uproar on social media if you couldn't hear Christian Horner or Toto Wolff crying down the radio to Michael Massey.
I don't know if they were crying, but there was a
lot of shouting and
There's a lot of pleading, wasn't there?
Yes,
There was a lot of pleading. One of the messages on the broadcast was genuinely just Toto Wolff going, Michael, and then it got cut off, which also I got a good laugh out of. Like,
Yeah.
This isn't
right.
What is going on?
Yeah. There was so much happening on that last lap.
Sort of desperate, embarrassing pleas over the radio.
Oh, dear.
But yeah, it's obviously caused a lot of conversation. There's one more thing that I want to ask you before we move on.
Okay.
Shane.
Okay.
Has this had a positive or negative impact on Formula One in the main, in the whole, like in the way that it is seen, not just by people like us who are big fans and pay attention to everything and read all the rules and share screenshots of the rules on their Twitter accounts?
Whoa.
Has this had a positive or net negative impact on the reach and opinion of the sport globally?
I think the controversy at the end of the season has had a negative impact on the sport. And that's purely because I was out with some friends today and none of them watched Formula One, but all of them asked me about the last lap, about what happened between Lewis and the FIA or Lewis and Max. They all heard about it because it's all been picked up by mainstream media and it's been not necessarily blown out of proportion, but it's been so heavily criticized by mainstream media that people who aren't a fan of the sport are starting to get on board and wonder why it was allowed to happen and why this was allowed to happen. I think it's gathered an interest for the wrong reason. And also, I read something online earlier, and I can't remember where it was from, but someone said something like, I'm not sure any major car manufacturer would relish spending millions of pounds on competing in a sport where a single person can override the published regulations for the sake of an entertaining finish. And that's within the rules. You've already established that actually that race director can do whatever he deems necessary to get that race going and get that race going before the end of the race. And like you said, finishing it underneath a safety car would have been horrendous. But will this deter any companies coming into the sport? Like you said, has the wider image of Formula One been tarnished by this controversial finish, or will it necessarily will it mean that actually in 3 months' time they would have published a new set of rules where people have less influence on the race and they have to stick to a set of guidelines, and actually moving forward we'll be in a better position? So maybe short time negative, long term positive. I think hopefully we'll be better because of this, and hopefully it won't happen again.
Yeah, I think that if there are manufacturers that are umming and ahhing about whether or not to come into Formula One, I think that this particular outcome might be on their list, but they probably have bigger concerns.
Money.
Money and the expense and the technology and all the rest of it. I mean, that's going to be at the top of their list, isn't it? But I think I echo what you said at the end there, which is that I think the short-term impact is negative, but the long-term impact is positive. Because like you, I had lots of people around me who don't watch Formula One asking me about the race, and a lot of people seem to be quite positive about it in a way because they wanted to know. They wanted to know what it was about. Some of them even watched the race and had never watched a race before.
Nice.
Even my girlfriend, who has no interest in Formula One whatsoever, despite my best efforts to try and get her engaged. She's not even the slightest bit interested. Even she was messaging me about it. So potentially this is getting more people into the sport. And if it means that there's more eyes on it and that they actually make some positive changes on the sport, which I hope that they will do. And I think that there's a lot of really good experienced ambassadors within the sport that I hope that they will take advantage of. People, even the drivers themselves, Lewis Hamilton, Sebastian Vettel, people like that should be consulted on these matters. I think there's a lot of potential for things to just get better and better. I hope that this season will be seen as maybe something of a testing ground for a lot of these new transparency features, as a kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Like a culmination of a lot of these transparency features that have been introduced into the sport in recent years, and that going forward, now that they've nailed down the way that it's being presented, now that they can nail down some of the more regulatory ruling aspects of things to do with race direction, to do with broadcasting as well would be nice as well. If we can get some better broadcasting in the way that it's actually shot, that'd be good. Although I actually think that this race was pretty good.
This race was pretty good for that sort of thing.
But Yeah, I think that the long-term impact will actually be positive because lots of people have suddenly started talking about Formula One, whereas before they weren't even the slightest bit interested. So I'm hoping that we can turn a questionable result into a good one. Right, here we go. View from the stands. We got there in the end. Feels like this podcast has already been 7 hours long, but we're going to try and press on to your views and comments on this race, and I'm sure that you had quite a few. Certainly, there's no shortage of opinions. Everyone's got an opinion on this race, and here are some of yours, starting with Daniel Fergie, 25, on Twitter, asking, now that this season has come to an end, what do you think has been an underrated moment throughout the last 9 months of pure drama? And this is a really good question, and I must admit that I'm slightly blindsided by it, because now I've got to think of what happened in the last 22 races.
I've got one.
Okay, well, then go
because,
for it, by all means.
Because I put these questions in the show notes, I actually had a little think about this. And I think one of the most underrated moments this year is that the only team to get a 1-2 was McLaren. And I think that speaks for itself, that actually they finished fourth.
I haven't underrated it.
And you haven't underrated it. But they finished fourth in the Constructors' Championship. And we've got Mercedes and Red Bull miles ahead of everyone else. And yet none of them scored a 1-2. But McLaren did. And I believe that was at Monza. It would have been at Monza because Ricciardo won the race.
Well, maybe this is a little closer to home than maybe you were thinking of, Daniel. But because I'm thinking off the top of my head here, maybe I'll think of a better one for a future episode, perhaps. But I think I'm going to go for an underrated moment, something that really should be talked about and highlighted. And I hope that everyone pays attention, especially the kids at home, the future generations. I think this is super, super important. Okay, and I actually did a little bit about this. Let me find it here. Here we go. This is the most underrated and most important moment. The way Lewis Hamilton handled this defeat was absolute class. And he is without doubt one of the greatest sportsmen in history and set an example for everyone to follow in how to handle a loss, even when you lose it in that way, even with difficult circumstances, even when you have a lot at stake. You shake your competitor's hand and you say, well done, and you recognize how good they are and that they are putting in the maximum effort as well. And excuse me, I think that that is so important if we want the sport to be positive going forward, if we want to find a shining light in all of this problems and difficulty and gnashing of teeth and injustice about what happened. There's something to point towards. It's a sign that there is still a lot of good to be found in this sport, and that it can be a symbol for good sportsmanship, period. Rather than just good racing, which obviously we want it to be as well. We also want it to be a symbol of good sportsmanship. And Lewis Hamilton showed that at the end of this race, because if there's one time where I think Lewis Hamilton could have been forgiven for being a sore loser, it would have been at that race.
And
but
he
still wasn't. He and his father straight in there, shook their hands. Well done, because Anthony Hamilton knows what that's like. He knows what it's like to see his son win his first world championship. And yeah, the circumstances are different. And, you know, Hamilton obviously was also in that last moment and must have understood the Massa family's frustration as well. So they get that completely, and they channeled that into being positive and being respectful and you know, taking the high ground. I mean, some of the things that Yas Verstappen said about Lewis Hamilton were not very nice. No. And they could have used that as ammunition to be sore losers, but they didn't. They wanted to go ahead with what was the sort of the positive thing to do, and good on them. And I hope that people paid attention to that. It's not something to do with racing, and it's not something to do with what happened on track, but it is to do with sportsmanship, and I think that it was very, very important. So pay attention. That's how you respond when you lose.
Perfect. Honestly, one of the best segments of this podcast throughout the whole year. That you've summarized. You've honestly summarized this podcast or this whole season
you can
perfectly.
Clip it for Twitter.
I will clip it and put it on Twitter. But that was lovely.
Right, who's next? Thanks for your question, Daniel. Great question.
Next is at Son of the Pair, and he has said, the FIA's decision has been all over the place this year. Wouldn't it be helpful for the stewards to have the same panel, or at least the same driver/lead steward to be able to implement the same penalties throughout the season to help with consistency? Brilliant question, because actually we mentioned it only 10 minutes ago in the podcast. I think going forward, having that lead steward or having the same set of 5 or 6 stewards going into every single race wouldn't be a massive change for the way Formula One is ran. We're not asking for a massive change. We're asking for a little bit of consistency and having the same 7 people go around the world. And I know you're asking a lot, but the drivers do it and the teams do it. And, there's a lot of media staff who do it. So finding 7 people who'd happily steward an F1 race for the whole year, I think would be a massive help and would definitely improve consistency in the sport.
Yeah, it's suffice to say that I agree in that it's got to be doable. It's got to be possible. Like you say, if everyone else is traveling around, I'm sure they can find some stewards to do it too. And if we want consistent stewarding, we need consistent stewards. So it seems pretty logical to me. And a good question to ask, and one that I hope that the FIA are asking themselves.
Thank you very much, son of the pair. Love the username.
Yeah, love that. Okay, next we have a handful of comments that were made on a post that was about whether or not it really was truly over and whether we could confirm Max as champion. I'm just going to read out all of these comments and then we'll discuss them in the whole because they're all sort of about the same thing. So first we had a comment from @CalWoodward99 who says, "This is going to the CAS, the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Just because FIA have reviewed themselves do not mean this is over. It's like marking your own homework. The CAS will review, and I believe there will be different outcomes. Hamilton was robbed today. He was the better man on the day and won." And then at Lipnoid says, "I don't think it's over. And sadly, I think Mercedes has no choice but to take it to CAS. The problem here is Massey." And then RPM legend @Dave Doherty added with a picture of Mercedes winning the Constructors' Championship. I think Dave is doing the Mercedes Twitter account's job for them by pointing out that they have actually won 8 Constructors' Championships. Yeah. It's a pretty mean feat. And Dave says, "That's all I can say. I think we should accept the fact that Verstappen won it and Mercedes has won the team championship. We can't do anything else now." So personally, I'm kind of more on... From my perspective, I'm more on Dave's position here that it's kind of happened and it's over and I'm moving on and, good for Verstappen. He deserves to win it. So it's a horrible mess and it's kind of a shame that it's ended that way, even if it was incredibly entertaining. But, let's move on with our lives and focus on the next championship and encourage things to be better for next season and for the rules and the like to move on. As for whether or not it's going to the court of arbitration, etc., Shane, do you still think that might happen? Because I don't think it will.
I think, especially listening to you with regards to how Hamilton obviously took that championship away from Massa in 2008 due to Glock driving off the track, having that incident and it going from one driver to the next driver within 30 seconds. I think the team, Hamilton's really got nothing to do with it. Hamilton doesn't decide whether this goes to court or not. It's Mercedes. And I think they need to reflect and say, actually, the rules weren't broken. It was a strange set of circumstances, which was within the rules. Was it really sporting? Probably not. You could argue there was an advantage given to one team and not the other, but actually Max Verstappen has been the better driver this year. His podiums speak for himself, and maybe they should just let this go. Save face. Stop the social media silence. Come back out. Celebrate that you're an 8-time Constructors' World Champion and reset. Come back next year. You've got a brand new driver with George Russell. You've got Lewis Hamilton, who will be hungrier than ever as long as he doesn't retire. And they'll bounce back. I'm sure they will. It's the same engines pretty much going into next year, so they won't be down on power. And they've got a brilliant team behind them designing the car. So who knows what that team can do going into 2022. So I personally think it would be nice if they could put it aside, admit that they've lost one of the championships. They still got one championship. They've got the money. They just haven't secured Lewis that 8th title, which would be obviously record breaking. But it would be nice for the sport if Mercedes put it aside, issued a statement, stop the hate, and let's look forward to 2022.
If it does go to this court, maybe it's an opportunity not for the result to be overturned, but for the FIA to be raked over the coals a little bit.
Absolutely,
for the way that they handled the season. Maybe that's why Mercedes are quiet. Maybe they're preparing for something like that instead. Maybe they want maybe they are going to take the battle on behalf of everyone to say, look, the FIA has got to be better. It needs to be more coherent with the way that it deals with its rules and regulations. Maybe it's something of that sort. I will be absolutely astonished if anything happens in such a way that the result gets overturned. I
don't think it will. No, not at all.
I cannot see that happening at all. When you mentioned the 2008 situation, I think that's completely different because obviously that was,
of course,
there wasn't any sort of like steward messing around going on that made that happen. But I can't see it. I can't see it being overturned in this particular situation. It seems like it's just done and dusted. And allegedly, Hamilton himself didn't want Mercedes to go ahead and do this. You have to forgive me. I can't remember who was reporting it, but somebody was reporting that allegedly Hamilton themselves was saying that they didn't need to do that, and that makes sense as well. That seems in keeping with Hamilton's general character as we've seen him, because he will probably be back next season and will go for it again. And he might just win the next season instead. He is still Lewis Hamilton. He has still got Mercedes going on. So yeah, we'll see. I'm not convinced that it will go to this court, but if it does, I would rather see it go as a means to sort the FIA out rather than
100%.
Rather than
and it would be nice
have a go at Max or whatever.
It would be nice if Mercedes made that statement. If that's what they choose to do, it should be Max Verstappen won the championship fair and square. We respect that. Huge congratulations, but we are going to court to sort out this mess. Which
would be nice if both them and Red Bull did it.
Yes, because actually that it could have easily been the other way around. It was just a matter of luck. And a lot of drivers are confused as to why this has happened as well. Carlos Sainz said on the radio behind the safety car, this race shouldn't be restarted. It should finish behind the safety car because there's not enough laps. The teams are benefiting from this. George Russell was obviously very vocal on Twitter. Not unsurprising because he's going into the Mercedes seat next year and he obviously wants to back the boys.
He's a Silver Arrows boy now.
He is a silver. He's no more than the Williams. But Charles Leclerc said something similar. It was a strange set of circumstances to end the race on. So, some clarity would be nice going forward. And that's what they should strive to achieve, not a change in the results, which I don't think would happen.
But thanks very much for everyone who got involved in that. Dave Doherty, Lipnoid, and Cal Woodward99 all on Twitter for getting involved. And you can always keep your questions coming as well, because we've got some more episodes coming for the remainder of the year. In fact, we still have to talk about the season itself, to talk about the cars and drivers, and we can probably touch on some of this then as well. But thanks very much for getting involved, and do continue to send us your questions and comments at RacePerMinute on Twitter, or you can get in touch via email, info@RacePerMinute, or on the website, raceperminute.com. There's a contact page on there.
Now it's time for Driver of the Day and Championship Standings. And if you're not aware of what the Championship Standings are, what are you doing listening to this podcast? Go and check them out, or actually hang around for 5 minutes and you'll hear them here. But this is an F1 podcast, and if you've listened to the rest so far, then absolutely fair play. But Driver of the Day and Championship Standings, the official Driver of the Day, and I was partly to blame for this because I also voted for him, was Kimi Raikkonen. And that just goes to show that this is a popularity contest, because Kimi Raikkonen sadly retired over halfway through the race. Didn't do anything spectacular, didn't do any worldly overtakes, but still won Driver of the Day. And I think the most upsetting bit about this was the plan was to vote for Kimi as Driver of the Day and then get his radio reaction, whether that would have been 30 seconds of pure silence or...
They didn't even get that, did we? Yeah,
he didn't even get the radio reaction because he was in the car. He was probably having an ice cream somewhere, sat with his kids. He knew. He knew.
Like, I'm going to get out of this somehow.
Somehow he found out that Twitter was planning on doing him Driver of the Day, and he was like, you know what? I've got to break my wife, hate it. Or whatever it was. He's on driving to a wall. Oh dear. I have to retire. Yes, Driver of the Day. Let's scroll down. Let's find my document, because I've come prepared for the last race of the year.
No, now, you voted. You voted. No. You gave your vote.
That was a popularity competition. Now I'm actually going for the Driver of the Day. So special mentions to Max Verstappen and Red Bull for trying multiple different strategies to outsmart the Mercedes boys and ultimately winning the Drivers' Championship. They could have settled for second. They had no choice but to try something different, and they just kept on going, and they just didn't give up. they just didn't give up at all. Even when they were 14 seconds behind, Max was putting in the laps as fast as he could. Lewis Hamilton, for the pace of that Mercedes in the race and how he conducted himself after losing the Drivers' World Championship in a slightly controversial way, like you already mentioned, and what will put us on Twitter, that how he conducted himself and how the Hamiltons dealt with that loss. Carlos Sainz for the podium. So the top two cars crossed the line, and I was like, who the hell's third? We're listening to Max Verstappen being screamed at on the radio and screaming back, and I was like, who's come third? And Carlos Sainz. What is it with this guy? He only gets a podium when something bigger has happened. Whether he gets to go on the podium to begin with, or whether he jumps up on there an hour later when there's been a disqualification or whatever. There's always something bigger going on to overshadow Carlos Sainz. Lando Norris for dealing with another unexpected puncture and still finishing P7. I don't know what it is with Lando. He seems to be very unlucky with his punctures at the moment, but luckily...
Is there anyone on the grid you're not giving an honourable mention
This is my last one, thank you very much. There's only been 4 drivers. It's Max, Lewis, Carlos and Lando, thank you very much. He had another unexpected puncture and he still finished in P7, which I thought was a good effort. But my driver of the day is Yuki Tsunoda, because he started off in P8, he finished in P4, overtaking Bottas on the last lap. Fantastic. Very up and down year, like we mentioned earlier in the podcast. And his personal best season finish and a joint best season finish for AlphaTauri, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. But it was good to see Yuki, just having a fantastic weekend, especially after qualifying on the mediums in Q2. He was the only other driver managing to do that. So a brilliant weekend for Yuki. I think he deserves driver of the day.
Yeah, very, very close honourable mention for me for Sainz, who capped off a fantastic first season at Ferrari with his 15th consecutive points finish and brilliant. His 4th podium of the year. Like you say, he does seem to have snuck. He's had 4. He really seems to have snuck them in. He really has been incredible for them this season. Beating Leclerc is in the standings.
I'm sure we'll talk about it.
But for the big turnaround, I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to go with Yuki Tsunoda as well. He's had a very, very poor season, all things considered. And he's bookended that poor show with 2 good performances. And so at least he finished it off in the right way. When he came out of the gate in Bahrain, I, like a lot of people, were very impressed.
On the hype train.
Bullishness and the aggression that he showed as a rookie. Because rookies normally come in and are a little bit demure and, well, what should I be doing? And I'll just kind of keep out of the way. But he wasn't like that. He was swearing over the radio and shouting and getting all excited.
Oh yeah, he was, wasn't he?
This is great. This is more like it. This is a rookie that just doesn't care and is going to be really angry. I thought that was fantastic. And he completely failed to follow up on that for 20 races and was below average at best. In a car that was really should have been at times fighting for podiums. It really felt like. I mean, that was the kind of quality that Gasly was putting in it. And here in Abu Dhabi, he finally showed some controlled aggression and maturity. Started P8, finished P4, like you said, easily his best result of the season. He got past Leclerc for P6, defended really well against Bottas early on. AlphaTauri actually made a good strategy call for a change and pitted him under the safety car. Then he got past Bottas at the restart with a nice little lunge. And ultimately, his overall pace was good enough to put him ahead of his teammate, who has been pretty outstanding all season. And some people would say one of the best drivers of the year on I think I would say more potential performance. I don't know. Gasly has been very good, but it still feels like he's not quite delivered in his full potential. But good job, Yuki. I hope that he can put that in more performances like that next year. So nice to end the year on us agreeing on driver of the day as well.
Doesn't happen very often. It is a good way to end the year.
Let's take a look at those standings then.
Right. Do you want to take us through, or shall I take us through the top 10?
Are we starting with drivers or constructors? Did I say drivers?
Let's start with drivers.
Okie dokie.
So the top 4 really haven't changed in order at all for the last couple of races. We've got Max Verstappen winning the Drivers' World Championship, if you haven't have guessed by now, with 395.5 points this year, with Lewis Hamilton in P2 with 387.5 points. Valtteri Bottas with 226, and then Perez with 190. There's your top 4 it was always going to be those top four. Even though Lando creeped in a couple of times beginning of the season, it was always going to be the Mercedes and the Red Bull who finished the top four. Now, this is where it gets interesting because this has actually changed quite a bit over the last couple of weeks. So in P5, we've got Carlos Sainz with the Ferrari with 164.5 points. And then Lando Norris with McLaren with 160 points. Lando dropped down into P6 this week because Carlos had that podium finish. McLaren, it's hard to describe what an end of the season they've had. I'm sure we'll talk about it when we review all the teams, but Ferrari definitely had the upper hand. And Norris was lucky not to drop down again because in P7, Leclerc was with 159 points, only 1 point away from securing P6. That would have been pretty tragic for McLaren. P8, you got Ricciardo with 115. P9, Gasly with 110 points. Just imagine what that team could do if their other drivers scored half the amount of points. They would have been right up there. Not right up there, but further up there. And to round up the top 10, we've got Fernando Alonso with 81 points in the Alpine.
And his teammate follows close behind, 74, Ocon. I think that Ocon can be proud of being that close points-wise to somebody 100%. With Alonso's quality, so he's done very well. Then Vettel and Stroll in 12th and 13th with 43 and 34. They're mirroring each other points-wise there. I'm sure both of them will feel a little bit frustrated. I think, if anything, that's probably a bit better than I expected at times, where they ended up. But that's partially helped by Tsunoda only having 32 points. Yeah. And that's bolstered by the 12 that he scored at the Grand Prix that we just saw. So P14 is not good for that AlphaTauri. It must be said. Russell stays in the same place as well with 16 points, 15th. Raikkonen with 10. Latifi 7. Giovinazzi still on 3. With Mick Schumacher. Kubica holds on to P20. Mazepin obviously getting no opportunity to outdo that because he didn't start the race. He tested positive for COVID-19 and couldn't do it, which was a shame. And because they didn't have another driver that had taken part in any of the other sessions, they weren't allowed to field anyone else. So it just ended up being 19 drivers starting the race. Not really any change from, P14 downwards. In fact, most of these positions hadn't changed at all. It's just a sort of a points change. But the potential was absolutely there in a few cases. But an interesting end with the driver standings. Imagine if it had ended with someone winning by 0.5, one of their 0.5 points having been the difference. Yeah, that would have made Belgium... The controversy of the Belgian Grand Prix seems so far away now.
It honestly seems like an age ago, doesn't it?
I guess it didn't really have as bigger impact as we thought it might have done at the time. And but it all feels like ancient history now, doesn't it? Right, moving on to the constructors' standings. Well, you wouldn't know it, seeing as it's barely been talked about, but Mercedes have won the constructors' standings for the 8th time. An incredible achievement. They did deserve the party that they didn't have and where there were no videos of and that nobody has talked about. Toto Wolff did not get drunk and was not singing and was not being carried by anyone. That didn't happen, okay?
Bottas was there as well.
I've been informed reliably by my... by a member of a German, a Central European car manufacturer, that none of this has taken place. But 613.5 points sealed it pretty handily for them. And Red Bull followed up with 585.5. The two of them in a league of their own compared to Ferrari and P3 with 323.5. But still, a very, very good tally of points for Ferrari, it has to be said. That closing half of the season was definitive for them points-wise. They clearly had the edge over McLaren, I'm sorry to say, who have to settle with for P4 with 275. And Alpine, despite AlphaTauri's excellent result in the last race, it wasn't enough to get them over the line, and Alpine do stick with P5, 155 points for them.
AlphaTauri, so close, but yet so far away with 142 points. I think next year, if Tsunoda does better and scores even twice the amount of points, they would have beaten Alpine. Who knows? They could have secured 5th in the championship if he just got that a little bit more consistency throughout the year. Aston Martin 77 points, Williams Mercedes 23 points, Alfa Romeo 13 points, and then Haas with 0 points. It's a real shame to see a team end the season with no points whatsoever because we've seen teams celebrate when they've scored 1 or 2 points. Look at Williams when they did. It was like they'd won the championship when in fact they'd probably won millions and millions of pounds or dollars because of those points. Real shame. I really hope Haas bounce back next year. Much simpler regulations. And they're allowed to not borrow parts from the cars, but cars have to disclose certain aspects, don't they? You can look at different parts now. Aerodynamics will be a little bit simpler. So hopefully with the cost caps and whatnot, Haas will be scoring a handful of points here and there. You never know what could happen. Miracles can happen, but they've got a good engine in the back. They've got a Ferrari engine in the back, so they should be all right. They just need to get that car pointing in the right direction, and then who knows what will happen. Stay tuned for next year.
Well, we finally made it to the end. We finally made it to the end of this epic podcast, which I'm sure is encroaching dangerously to 2 hours in length. But
So
I think
close.
we've earned it. I think we've earned a little bit of an indulgence for the final race, and the race itself was something of an indulgence for Michael Massey. I really still feel like at the end he was like, "Oh, do you know what? I've just had enough of this. I'm just gonna do whatever, and no one can stop me."
Would that be the shock retirement this year? You know, when Nico won the championship and he retired 4 days later, you think Michael Massey's like, "No, I'm done. I am so
I'm out.
done."
Well, guys, we went motor racing, and now I'm out.
Oh God.
But despite all that, thanks very much for joining us for this episode. And if you've been joining us for some or all of the episodes of this season, we want to thank you very much for being with us and for joining us and part of this. We do this because we enjoy doing it and because it's like an outlet for us to discuss the race and I think it really helps both of us crystallize how we feel about races.
Yeah, I feel so much better after talking to you about the race, and I feel like I'm much calmer. I've got a better understanding. I'm not holding much grudges anymore. This is why we do it. We already did this like week on, week out, and it's just good to have that chat and let you guys hear what our thoughts and opinions are.
Yeah, and I feel the same way in speaking to you, Shane, in that, you know, it's important to have someone to bounce off, because sometimes you can get a bit, and I'm using the sort of collective you rather than you specifically, like we can all get a little bit caught up in our feelings and our emotions and our thoughts on certain things, and it's by working together that we make these things clearer. And I think that that's kind of what works on this podcast, really. I wouldn't like to do something like this by myself, because I feel like I'd make a terrible ass of myself. But
Likewise.
yeah, I think that we do make a good team and we enjoy what we do. So if you're here for it and you've been enjoying us for that, or maybe you've been listening and thinking what a pair of tits these two are, then thanks for listening anyway, because that's, you know, still appreciate it. And do continue to send us any of your thoughts and comments to us at RacePerMinute on Twitter. Give us a follow. We're probably a little bit more on the understated side when it comes to Twitter, but we can at least promise no nonsense. You know, we can promise that just a sort of very earnest passion for the sport and for its occasional silliness. You can always follow us on there and get in touch. You can also get in touch at our website, raceperminute.com. There's a contact form on there. info@raceperminute.com is the email address. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can comment below. We try and get back to a lot of the comments that we see. And thanks to everybody who has been chatting and getting involved. If you enjoyed this episode, then you can give us a rating or a like wherever it is you're watching or listening. If you really like what we do, then the best thing to do is to subscribe, because you'll keep getting all of the episodes in your inbox, in your podcast app, wherever it is that you're seeing us. And if you really, really want to support the show after the crazy, crazy season that we've had and help us keep doing it for hopefully what will be a crazy season in maybe a slightly better way in 2022, then you can support us to keep doing that by going to patreon.com/raceperminute, where for as little as £1 a month, you can help support us, get your name on the website. You can see that we already have one of our middle tier patrons at the start of the video, Nathan, who's our race engineer tier. You can come on the Discord with us, watch race sessions and other sessions with us. We're trying to just offer a little something back. But ultimately, I think the main thing with the Patreon is just, if you really want to help support us, then you can. There's absolutely no obligation to do it. But if you want to, then you can chuck us a couple of quid, because it does cost money to do this. We love to do it and we're happy to do that. But we've set a little target to try and offset the costs of everything as we do it. So if you want to be part of that and help us contribute, then patreon.com/RacePerMinute. Shane, I'm actually a little bit out of breath, and it's not just because I'm full of cold. It's because we've had an epic episode to finish us off. What have we got coming before the next season? Because this isn't the end. We're not just stopping the podcast and doing nothing until winter testing starts again. What have we got planned?
First things first, we're going to go through and review every team and the drivers within those teams. We've yet to decide whether that will be one long podcast. We'll break it up maybe into 10 shorter, 10, 20-minute episodes where we talk about the teams and how they performed, what our expectations were, how they performed to those expectations, and especially how the drivers were doing and what we're excited for next year. And then we've got to go through our pre-season reviews. Or what did you call it? What was the episode called where we had the unusual reviews or our predictions?
Five bold predictions. Yeah, we need to review those,
predictions for the 2021 season. And it has been a bold season, so we need to go back and remember what we predicted and who came out on top with that. And then we've got our season review on top of that. The highs, the lows, and
our rewards.
Everything in between. And the rewards as well. Blimey, we've got a lot coming up to fill the gap because it's only like 96 days until the next race. But there's content. Obviously, we've got pre-season testing in February as well. And all the car liveries again and all the car launches. It only feels like yesterday we were talking about how Alpine absolutely botched their holographic launch and how Aston Martin managed to get Daniel Craig on and all these people to celebrate their car. I can't wait to do it all over again in 2022, but there's a lot more to come. I'm excited. Alex, what are you looking forward to?
Yeah, the livery stuff is always good fun. The car launches are always hilarious. There's always much entertainment to be found there. The silly season never ends in Formula One. I think it's important to remember that. There is something kind of inherently silly about the whole thing. And I love it for that. That's what I like about it. I like that it's a ridiculous soap opera because it's always been that. And it's why I do my best to limit my exposure to social media stuff in regards to Formula One because it can all get a little bit too heated. People taking it a bit too seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And really it is meant to be fun. It's meant to be enjoyable. And I've tried my best to look at it in that way because it's healthy and it means that it can be enjoyed by people. And I'm looking forward to next season. I hope that we can iron out some of the creases and continue to just make the sport better and better, not just as an entertainment package, which it is, but also as a sporting event as well. And we'll find out who is going to be the number one next year instead. It could be Lewis Hamilton again. It could be Max Verstappen again. It could be someone completely different. We could see Ferrari resurgent.
Could be Carlos Sainz.
No, it could be Lando Norris. It could be Nikita Mazepin. We just don't know. Haas come in and just blow everyone away.
They did on the first season, to be fair.
They got that Ural Cali money, and it's just miles ahead of everyone else. There's just no one does understand what Haas have done, but they've got a rocket ship.
Imagine. Right.
But whatever happens next, we hope that you'll join us, and we're looking forward to it. So. See you next time.